Okay, guys, today we are back with the Coach Trap podcast. This week, we are very lucky to be joined by Nick Lassen. But before we dive into an amazing episode, I just want to remind you 90% of coaches and online businesses quit every single year. They fail. The real question is, will you be one of the 10% that make it? If you want to make it, you've got a great opportunity here to watch the Coach Trap, join the school community, mingle with other coaches, and find out, what is the secret sauce behind making it a success in 2026. But today, we're going to have a great chat about Nick, his business, how he got here, how he's trying to inspire others, and let's have a deep dive. Nick, a pleasure to meet you, mate, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, really. Thank you. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure for me.
Awesome. Great stuff. Look, me and Dan follow you on X, right? That's how we met, isn't it? Right. So
Mm.
I love some of the stuff you're doing, right? And we had a little chat before we come on. I'm inquisitive about this world, right? Inquisitive about, like I said, some of these people, and I like watching some of these hacks and some of the stuff you got into. But I know behind that there's a story, isn't there? Right. So
Mm.
how did you get into it? What inspired you to get into this space? What inspired you to get out on
Yeah.
X and to talk to the world about it?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Great question. So I'm from a small town in Denmark. Always been super interested in kind of like optimizing one's own performance, self-optimization, improvement, continued improvement. My heroes have always been, sports stars, especially those who started off not too talented, but put in the grind and really worked with themselves to improve themselves, right? So all of that stuff made me want to study sports science. So I moved to a slightly bigger town in Denmark to study sports science. Studied that for 5 years, bachelor's and a master's. Then in those years, I was working in a professional sports academy, but also just pure coincidence, I had a small business doing like cocktail catering, actually pretty fun stuff with a friend. And it just showed me that, wow, all of this stuff about like improvement, self-optimization, all that stuff, it was also super cool and interested in the realm of business and startup. So when I was then finishing up my master's, I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this sports science stuff, but I want to merge that with like business and startup. And then I went online, as you do in our time of age, and I found this weird startup in Copenhagen that did something within longevity. And I had no idea what longevity was, but I took my phone and I called the guy many times. And at some point he said, yeah, okay, then come and have a chat. And then I took the train to Copenhagen and we have a chat, and I landed a job in this longevity startup without knowing what longevity is. So that's how I got into this world of longevity and biohacking, and then unfolded from there.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. One thing we've all got in common, right? All interest in sport, right? Dan, I know
Mm.
you're dying to ask him a few questions. Dan's into his cycling, right? Very analytical, right?
Yeah,
And I imagine that fits in, Dan, doesn't it? To sort of like this sort of.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting. And there's not really many people talking about it apart from like the big gurus like we talked about
mm.
before, like Brian Johnson and those people. So yeah, it's really interesting that you're in this space for sure.
Thank you. Yeah. I love this space as well. Super interesting and kind of like a new frontier in some way. Kind of
Frontier.
like
Love that. Yeah, I think that's a good point to go with that next. Before we come on, we're talking about the biggest tweet in the world yesterday, right? And the biggest change that I've seen in, I'd say, someone who's not a guru, but someone who's going towards being something maybe bigger than a guru, right? So, biggest tweet in the world yesterday wasn't Elon Musk. It wasn't about the Epstein files. It was Gary Breaker, right? Or Brecker.
yeah,
And
yeah,
he was on a podcast and he was saying that with AI, he thinks in 5 years' time, people will have a choice whether they live between 120 and 140 years old. Thinking, oh my God, I know he got
yeah,
big through working with the guy who founded UFC. Yeah. He helped him,
mm,
did he? Transformed him from sort of like overweight guy to mogul, if you like, right? But makes me think, right? That wouldn't have been the biggest tweet in the world 5 years
mm,
ago. I've got a lot more eyes on this, right? And going back to what I said about Brian Johnson, when he first started, he was ridiculed. I remember watching the Netflix, I remember talking to this thing, and it was like, who's this crazy, weird guy, right?
yeah,
That
yeah.
isn't the crazy, weird guy anymore. He's
No,
a
no,
big,
no.
he's a big hit on all these big podcasts. People are fascinated now with how to look
Absolutely.
younger, how to feel younger,
Yeah.
And it makes me think, right, that you're in this in an exciting time, right? So I think my real question for you is where do you see this going? Do you see that it's at a plateau and this is as far as it's going to go, or do you think it's just going to go up and up and up?
It's hard to predict anything about, and I'm definitely not the right person to make that sort of prediction. It's also important for me to say that I'm not fascinated, or I am fascinated, but I'm not. My number one thing is not longevity within, or like in the way where I want to be able to live forever. This is a completely different talk, but I also think there's a lot of meaning in that we're all gonna die someday. But that's a completely different talk. But the point is that for me, longevity in biohacking should first and foremost be about optimizing the quality of the time that we are here and that we know we are here. Yes, we are probably going to live a little bit longer than the generations that came before us. But if we're going to live to 120 or 140, I mean, that's not the point for me. The point for me is to live. We also talk about lifespan and health span, right? So the point is to have as long of a health span as possible. Lifespan is not for me that important. So it's more about feeling better, not being so frail when we age. And my specific focus is actually not even that. It's mental energy, right? So it's about being able to perform at your best while you are here, while you are young, while you have these big ambitious goals, not burning out, but actually performing at your maximum, and fighting against a world that's in many ways built to make us eat really bad food and be stressed out and live indoor and not move enough, right? So yeah, that didn't really answer your question, but it's just important for me to say that
Love it.
that is what I love, and not so much if we're gonna live to a
Yeah.
1,000 years.
Yeah, that's great. Just before I hand you over to Dan, I've got some more questions for you, right? So I look at my wife's life, right, and I tend to gauge her as what normal people are doing, right? She's obsessed by her Apple Watch, obsessed
Yeah.
by stats, right? Also obsessed by multivitamins, obsessed by skincare, obsessed by macros, right? And stuff like that, right? And I can see that actually I'm 10 years older than my wife. 10 years ago, I didn't care about that. I'm not even sure it was a thing 10 years ago. I don't think people were interested in it. So I mean, I need to see where that's going to go, right? That's one of my questions for you is, do you think in the next few years, every single person will be doing it?
I think definitely a lot of people will do it, and more people than what are doing it right now. Definitely, it's a trend that's going to continue, I believe, for sure, because a lot of other bigger things in the society is going on. So we're probably going to have more free time, and we need to channel that energy and that attention somewhere. Seems like there's a movement going on where this attention is going towards our health, and we know that we are not living the healthiest life in the world that we've built now. So 100%, yeah, I think it's a trend that's going to continue, definitely.
All right, interesting stuff. I've got two last questions for you, then I'm going to hand you over to Dan. I can see he's desperate to
Mm,
get stuck in. The other one was about food, right? You picked up on that.
mm,
So when I lived in England, right, I was 16 stone. Right? I was a big chap, I'd say, a
mm,
big guy. But I exercised a lot, right? I was always working out. I was walking, doing stuff, stuff, stuff. But the weight stuck to me. It was hard to shift it. In England,
mm,
moved to
mm.
Bali, then Thailand, then whatever, right? My regime exercise hasn't changed a lot. My diet has changed a hell of a lot. Basically, because I'm not eating microwave meals, I'm not eating on the go,
Yeah,
not eating fast food. Everything is out of a
love.
restaurant now. Right? I actually get to
Yeah,
sit down every night and eat out of a
yeah.
restaurant. Gone from 16 stone to 13 stone without dieting. I
Mm.
haven't once cut my macros or thought about any of that. And that's just been in a different place, right? So with the eyesight, I say not the eyesight, the lens that you're looking at through this, where does your mind go with that shift, from being 16 stone in England to being 13 stone in Southeast Asia without really changing too much about how I look at food, but with how I'm eating it, the where does your mind go with that?
That is so interesting, because this is what I meant with, like, we need to fight against the world that's almost built to make us fat and unhealthy and miserable, basically. I mean, a lot of people who know way more about diet and nutrition and all of this stuff and addiction than me also point out that a lot of the food that we eat in our part of the world are designed in a lab, and it is specifically designed to make us eat more. So And there are some fascinating studies also with like how many calories do you actually burn as a result of how much you move, and like we tend to believe that is like, you know, linear. If I'm not sure if you can say that, but like there's the number one thing that matters, how much we exercise, but it's not at all. It's how much we eat and the stuff that we eat, and that stuff. It means just so much more for gaining and losing weight. And so it just shows that, you know, there are the food that we eat in kind of developed Western world is designed to make us eat more because it's designed to make the companies earn more money.
Yeah, 100%. It's the biggest change I've noticed since been away is how much healthier the food is. And actually, when you go to the shop, there aren't any microwave meals here. You just don't
Mm,
see them. And
mm,
there are fast food shops. There's not as many. There's just not
mm,
as many. They're just not as big a thing. Right. Before I pass you over to Dan, one thing I loved on your website was I might butcher this. Okay. So feel free to step in anytime. Was a
mm,
deodorant, right? Like a deodorant roll. Right now, this is interesting, Dan. You're going to like this. Me and my wife went shopping the other day. Right, my deodorant, right, cost $1 and a pound to £2. Right, my wife's one. £25, £25 for a deodorant. And I remember I'm saying to her, like, why do you need this £25 deodorant? Well, because it's natural. It doesn't have toxins. It's not going to make me sick. And I had this moment. I've heard that before and I've seen that
mm.
before on your website. I've never heard of that before in my life about deodorants making you unwell or sick or that sort of stuff. Never heard of it. I know it's bad for the environment in terms of
Mm.
the sprays, but never heard about the toxin side of it. Dan, I know you're desperate to get your teeth in this. That must be a gold mine for Talk on X and Substack and that sort of stuff. Where does your marketing mind go with something a bit like that? And you know, and also laughing about the storytelling aspect between me and my wife, because that is a true story. I couldn't believe it. The price difference, but then the difference actually in what she was talking about, the lifestyle changes after.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I think it's a very niche thing. So I wouldn't have it as like your number one thing is I sell this toxin free deodorant. Obviously, I'm not sure, like with your coaching, say you got a client today and obviously you're focused on like the productivity, mental energy kind of side of things. What would your coaching look like for them? Because that's going to give me a little bit more context to try and give you some
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
suggestions.
Always
So it's centered around kind of two things. It's on the very foundational level. It's my point is to start viewing the brain as a muscle, like we view a muscle of the body. It's something that can be trained, and it's something that needs load management. We have this tendency to think of the brain as something that we can just push, 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 and you know, it's sort of it is the way it is. You know, you cannot make it better, and yeah. But my whole point is also coming from the sports science world that, you know, you can train the brain, you can optimize your ability to perform, but you also need to load manage it. You need the rest. You cannot just push through. I always say you wouldn't go running up a mountain after you've had your leg day in a fitness. But somehow we tend to believe that we can be focused and answering emails and DMs and everything 24/7 in our modern lifestyle. So this is kind of the foundation, right? And with that, then I use something called neuromeditation for training the mind, and then I use like then all of this longevity biohacking stuff comes in as a coaching aspect of how to actually manage your mental energy, you know, load manage the brain. So these are like, yeah, weekly one-to-ones where we go through a lot of different things. I might also bring in some experts. I'm working with some experts on sleep and diet, and yeah, so that's how the coaching looks.
Yeah, very cool. So I looked at your profile and obviously you're giving out quite a lot of useful information, relevant information, attracting obviously the people you want to attract, the professionals who want more energy, that kind of thing.
Mm,
What I didn't see was like what the coaching would actually be. So I saw you giving out a lot of information, but
mm,
what was like the end goal of the information? Obviously it's to get clients, we know that,
mm.
but they don't know that. They don't really know probably that you do the coaching.
Yeah,
Obviously, you've got in your bio two links. You've got the toxin-free deodorant and you've got the newsletter. I think the deodorant is more of a thing that you recommend to clients that are already working with you, rather
yeah,
than a thing that you recommend to the world before they've actually become a client. I think that's what I would prioritize for
yeah.
sure.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's obviously a really cool thing, but it's very niche. So I would save it for the people who actually really want and need it.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point. Good point. So yeah, we'll focus more about the on the coaching side of things and getting people
Yeah, exactly.
interested in working with me on a one-to-one. Yeah.
Could go so many ways with this. I'm so interested in the sleep side. There's so many angles, so many. Obviously, it's not one component to this, is there? Right? If you're talking about sleep,
Mm,
diet, exercise, and the meditating aspect to it,
mm,
it's like it's also this, isn't it, Dan? There's many different tools in the shed. I was going to say. So,
mm.
do you see what I'm trying to say? With what with like coaching or like whatever you do. Normally, it's the blinkers are on. It's quite straightforward, but there's lots to go. This I have to know about the meditation. Talk me through that. How does that look?
If it looks pretty weird if it's the neuromeditation specifically, because you have this thing in your head that measures your brain waves, and so it looks pretty weird. But yeah, meditation, I think everybody is familiar with as a very, very basic sort of thing. But my whole point, and it's not my point, it's something I've learned elsewhere, is that meditation is really just not just one thing, and it's often thought about as something that's just about reaching Zen, whatever that is, and like being a monk. But meditation is different things. It's more like a set of methods to train the brain to achieve different things. So there's like focused attention meditation, which is obviously about training your brain's ability to sustain focus. And then you have things like mindfulness, which is maybe a bit more about distancing yourself from the thoughts that you might have. So we have different techniques to achieve different things. So that's, for me, has been the most important, to recognizing that and then using meditation the right way, or like choosing the right method of meditation, right? And then specifically to answer that question with the neuromeditation, it's neurofeedback meditation is neurofeedback is a method for measuring brainwaves, so electrical signals on your head. And then, there are different brain waves. These are categorized broadly into like 4 to 5 different types of brain waves, and then there are different areas in the brain, right? And so and then with neurofeedback, you then give real-time feedback on how your brainwaves are operating, typically with audio, but could also be visual feedback. So let's say you want to raise a certain type of brainwave in the front part of the brain, maybe, then you hear a sound. The sound increases once you achieve that. So it's taking that method and putting that in meditation, so that you make sure that with focus meditation, specifically, you want to increase something called frontal theta. And then when that happens, then the sound goes up. So yeah, that's what it is. Hope that makes sense.
Right, I've got a question for you, Nick and Dan, based on meditation. So I'm quite a lot older than Dan. I'm not going to tell you how much older than I am than Dan. But when I was Dan's age, I'd have had no interest in meditation at all. Just interesting, right? So, but now at my age, I do. And there's a reason why, because burnout is very different as you get older. As you get
Mm,
older, you can't quite handle things at the same level as you did when you were younger. That makes me think two things, right? One, Dan, is have you ever meditated, first of all, right? And Dan, second of all, what sort of age groups do you think? Because that's an answer for both of you, actually. What
mm,
sort of age groups do you think this is aimed at? Because I would say between 18 to 25, not sure. I'm not sure. I was too interested in nightclubs, right? Too interested in house music, too interested in all that sort of stuff. Right? However, when I went through like an older phase, right, I did start to get interested in it. And I definitely noticed that maybe like 31 to 35, I was almost, like I said, it went from being watching it to being really inquisitive to want to know how
mm,
how how this works, right? So I do meditate, I try, but in my early 20s, I wouldn't have given it a thought. And that makes me go to think of like this client avatar, down the sort of person who's interested in this. Because Brian Johnson obviously is a certain age, as is Gary Brecker. Yeah, they probably weren't interested in it at 20, in the early
mm.
20s, whatever. So, what's your thoughts for both of you, Nick? Maybe let's go with you first on this. Who's your like
Mm.
client avatar? What sort of age, and male or female as well? Interesting stuff. Is it the same
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
setup? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, my dream client is, or like my avatar, or whatever you call it, is not the 18 to 25-year-old. So I'm thinking more like 30, 30 plus, maybe even 35 plus. I definitely think that yeah, meditation is not for everyone, and also maybe you do tend, or your body or your mind do tend to be a little bit more forgiving with you at a younger age, if you push through these mountains of work and stress. But it just is not once you get a little bit older. So for both interest and relevance, the avatar is a bit higher in age. Male or female is
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, that's really it's
Yeah.
interesting as well. So Dan, what's your thoughts? Oh, Dan, I've got to know. Come on, do you meditate? Is this something that you do in between writing tweets and cycling, or because you probably don't need to yet? Go on, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I agree with you both. Like, for sure, 18 to 25, I feel like I don't need to. I don't do it.
Mm.
Maybe I do. Maybe I could benefit from it, but I don't know, to be honest, many people my age who would.
How old are you then?
I am 19,
Ah, okay.
so yeah. So I don't think many people would be too
Yeah.
bothered.
Yeah.
So I would think 25, 30 to 45. Personally, I would go for males as well, because obviously you're a male. You're gonna be able to have that story that's gonna compel them that little bit more. And the marketing with men to women is actually a little bit different with coaching like this. And to hook you'd have to choose one. And I think the males would be much easier to attract, basically. So yeah, 30 to 45.
Yeah.
Potentially people, business owners, there's a lot of those on X.
Yeah.
Pretty easy to reach. And those are the people that are going to need it the most, I guess, with more energy. They're going to benefit the most. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
why I'd go with it.
yeah, those are the people I'm targeting. Yeah, the business owners, business leaders
Yeah.
type of people.
And then it's finding out their interests, which is another thing as well, which is, like I
Mm,
said, for me, like I said, when I was younger, not so interested. Now a lot more interested because my body's changed,
mm,
if that makes sense. I'm more interested in, how it works and all that sort of stuff. So again, there's so many angles that we can go with this. Imagine if you were going to pick one, right? So we've touched on diet, right? We've touched on meditation. I know we've not really gone into sleep, right? But if you had
mm,
to pick one, because I love talking about sleep. I could talk about this all day, Dan, right? So
mm,
when I worked flat out, when I was doing 7 days a week at a job, like 4 hours was optimal for me, right? And actually, if I did over 4 hours, I felt like shit. If I did under 4 hours, I felt like shit. It was like 4 to 5 hours was good. Elon Musk sleeps about that. I remember Arnold Schwarzenegger, this guy I looked up to for years. He's got this famous quote about sleeping faster, right, to keep up with a busy routine. You have all these people talking about 5 a.m. morning starts, right? All that sort of shit as well. But what is optimal? And then you have Conor McGregor in Cristiano Ronaldo, who openly talk about sleeping about 12 hours a day in
mm,
pods and stuff,
mm,
right? If they're polar opposites, aren't they? If you look at what like Elon Musk was talking about, 4 hours a day, what me doing, and then Ronaldo at 12, Conor, Conor McGregor in a pod for 12 hours a day or whatever he was saying,
mm,
right?
mm.
It's so different, completely different. Does that fit with age? Does that fit with lifestyle? Does that fit with, muscle growth or that sort of stuff? Where does that go? Again, what's
Yeah.
your thoughts on that?
Well, many ways to answer that, and full disclosure, there are a lot of people who know more about sleep than me. That's why I'm also working with a specific insomnia coach. But if you just look at like the broad kind of science, a lot of evidence points to like 7 to 8 hours is the optimal, and there is actually some interesting science showing that maybe sleeping much more than 8 could actually be not more beneficial, actually maybe even a little bit damaging. I don't think anybody should stress about that, but it seems like there's like a sweet point there for like if you look at it in like a broad spectrum. But then I mean, you cannot say biohacking without saying n equals 1, right? Which just means that you need to find out what works for you and not what works for 95 or 99% of people. I acknowledge 100% that there might be people in this world who can get by and who can function optimally with 4 hours seems very low, but let's say 5, 6 hours of sleep, 100%. But I would never recommend that for the vast majority of people. 100%. I think it's a very, very few people who can thrive on that little sleep. And then on the other side, there are people who train so hard and who have so much stress. These sports people, I definitely think that they might actually need that much sleep. Again, 12 hours seems really like a lot. Definitely, maybe they do need more than 8 to 9 hours of sleep. So yeah, I know it's not really a question, but it's just not really an answer. But yeah, n equals 1 is kind of what I would say, and that's why you do need to make tests on yourself, blood work and all different sort of stuff to find out what works for you.
Wow. So just before we finish for today, right, Nick, normally what we do is we get the coach to ask Dan a question, right? It can be any question you want, even how many hashtags do I use, or do I use hashtags, or optimal post times, whatever you want, right? And that's to inspire the coaches that are watching it. But one last thought. So finishing on sleep, Man United were the first club to get sleeping mattresses at their training ground. Alex
Yeah.
Ferguson was the first person to put them in at a club, right? And obviously dramatically changed how they were. You know, they smashed everything. Every single football club now has sleeping arrangements at their training ground now. I think that the sort of thing that you're talking about, like Brian Johnson, which maybe was ridiculed at the start, will become the norm more and more. Like my wife, you know, like I said about her with a Apple Watch and my mum with one as well. You can see how like
Mm,
the older generations definitely going to take it. I think it's a really exciting space, and they're really interested to see where you're going to go with it and where it goes. You can see that what was maybe a bit out there to people is going to become the norm, isn't it? You know, people are going to
mm,
start
mm.
counting macros and counting hours of sleep and taking blood tests more often, all that sort of stuff. But so I absolutely love that work that you're doing. That's amazing. So do you have, what would be your question for Dan? Like I said, it can be anything. Now remember, the real aim for it is think about the coaches at home that maybe don't have somewhere to go, right? Or AI won't
Yeah.
quite answer it for you, right? So go for it.
So yeah, I think it would be for me, or like with a starting point in my business, my coaching. Would you focus more on the sleep side of things, on the exercise side of things? And remember, I have a background in sports science, or in the meditation side of things.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's exactly what I was thinking as well, actually. I think honestly, you can reach a lot of high performers on X. High performers want all of that stuff, all of the stuff that can make them better. They
Mm,
want to know about it. So I think if you talked about kind of getting more energy as a whole, that is going to attract those people that you want to attract. Especially with your story as well, with almost burning out. You told us
mm,
before you came on the podcast. I think if you leverage that, you use that, talked more about yourself, your experience, that's going to also attract a lot more people, and that it's going to make them understand really what you do rather than
mm.
talking about like specific things, different things.
Yeah, yeah.
It's going to bring them together almost through that story. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Thank you.
I would always say as well, Dan, and I'd love to know your thought on this before we hand over to Nick, is what it looks like everyone else is doing, I would do the opposite. So let's say that fitness is the most saturated niche, and I imagine it is, right? And maybe diet second, sleep third. I think the meditation one. If it's the least saturated niche and
Mm.
it's going somewhere, I would tend to lean into that a bit, Dan. Would you be the same, or would you stick to one which is maybe more sort of, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would compare to like competitors. So if you were going to go against like a fitness specific person,
Mm.
who would be better? And if you were going to go against a sleep specific person, who would be better? I think at the moment, your best angle is all three of them together, or all however many of them are together. I think that is where you're going to be best compared to the competition, and where you're going to kind of outwork them, outdo them basically in terms of value for people. So I think, yeah, for sure, blending them is going to be
Blending.
pretty,
Okay.
pretty lucrative.
Cool.
Love
Cool.
that.
Cool.
Good
Yeah.
answer. Good answer.
Yeah.
Nick, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yeah.
Buddy, where is the best place for people to find you?
So for frequency, it's definitely X. I'm trying to grow there and to turn that into a real kind of audience. Other than that, I have my newsletter where it's bi-weekly. Probably gonna raise the frequency there a little bit and slightly, longer format. So yeah, maybe start with the X, and if you like it, then subscribe to the newsletter.
So if you want to find out more about Nick, all of his links will be in the details. Nick, before we go, any take homes? If you had to give anyone a tip watching this about, hacking, what would it be?
Mm,
One
mm.
take home.
I think I usually say, exercise is probably the best thing you can do for your health and productivity, and diet is super strong as well. But nothing works on a foundation that is fragile, and that foundation is built on sleep and recovery. So start by fixing that, and then all the other stuff will actually work the way that it is intended to.
Really interesting, really interesting. Actually, I'm really glad that my wife does listen to these. And if she would have heard you talking about £50 toxin aftershaves or something,
Hmm.
I can imagine they would have turned up. Nick, thank you so much for joining us. Guys, for
Thank you.
everyone who's joining us, remember, whatever you do, don't fall into the coach trap.